Hello everyone, and welcome. I'm Julie Posetti. I'm Global Director of Research at ICFJ and Professor of Journalism at City University in London. And I'm here with a woman who genuinely needs no introduction to this festival, but I will introduce her nonetheless. It's the exceptional Maria Ressa, founder and CEO of Rappler in the Philippines, and of course the woman we refer to as journalism's Nobel laureate, having won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2021. I'm hoping that my voice holds out. I didn't have one at 7 o'clock this morning, so please bear with us. But how could you not persevere sitting next to a woman like this on stage, whose very middle name really is perseverance and determination? So we're here to discuss democracy, disinformation, and demagoguery. And no better person than Maria to enlighten us on those issues and challenges in 2024. So when Maria was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize alongside Russian journalist Dimitry Muratov at the end of 2021, it was the first time that the practice of journalism had been honoured by the Nobel Committee since 1936. The winner that year was a persecuted German editor who'd been imprisoned by the Nazis and who was prevented from going to Oslo to receive the Nobel Prize. I wrote about this at the time and raised the concern that Maria herself may not be able to travel to receive the prize because of the ongoing efforts, it has to be said, to prosecute and persecute and detain and contain her efforts. Nevertheless, she did make it to Oslo. So Maria and Dimitry were cited by the Nobel Committee for fighting courageously to safeguard freedom of expression as representatives of all journalists who stand up for this ideal in a world in which democracy and freedom of the press face increasingly adverse conditions. And Maria, since then, as we discussed yesterday, you've described 2024 as the year where democracy could fall off a cliff. And many of us are aware that in this year, more than any other point in history, people will turn out to vote in democratic contexts, with 64 countries and the European Union all heading to the polls at some point in this year. Notable, of course, are the elections in the US, the UK, South Africa, places like Indonesia and India as well. So what does all this mean for journalism? And I want to start, Maria, by taking you back to reflections on the situation facing the 1936 laureates. Are we back to the future, in effect?
So first of all, thank you for everyone who trudged through the rain and the cold to actually be here. I feel like Perugia is, hi. It's like Alcoholics Anonymous for journalists.
I like to think of it more as a revival meeting for journalists.
It is. But it's like, I'm Maria Ressa, a recovering journalist who will try to reinvent what journalism is, right? This is why we're here. But so back to the future, definitely. I mean, I feel like Sisyphus and Cassandra combined because since we saw the data, and it began in 2016 for us in the Philippines, right? So since then, what we saw was really information operations, information warfare that has impacted every part of society, the cellular level of society, the people we serve, the societies that groups behave differently. And then finally, I think the last one is how, you'll see this in the reports that are now coming out, how literally our biology is being rewired, reshifted so that it actually is emergent human behavior, right? That this technology is so powerful that it is shaping emergent human behavior, the way we are evolving. So look at us poor journalists when the dam is falling on us and we're there holding our finger in the dam. This is what I had said in 2016, 2017. In 2021 at the Nobel lecture, I talked about a colleague of mine in the Philippines had been killed in front of his house 36 hours before I gave the Nobel lecture. Look, Back to the Future. In the panel yesterday, we talked from Brazil, from South Africa, from Georgia, breaking news in Georgia right now, about what each of us were trying to do, but you can see that this is pivotal. And what everyone in the room will do, don't think you're only one person. What you will choose to do will determine whether our 1936 moment, whether this moment, whether democracy will survive, whether these values will survive, or whether we head into a decade or more. And I'll put that into data, right? Because Julie, with ICFJ and UNESCO, published in 2022 a report on gendered attacks on women journalists. You know what she told me, and then you can tell more. She told me that I was the only one who didn't cry in her interviews.
It's true.
And I didn't cry because I had the data, right? That data is empowering, and it made me realize that this is also part of the reason I cringe when someone says they're protecting free speech, because information warfare is about pounding you to silence. It is about using the technology to exponentially silence your voice. You felt this. It really began in 2014. We had a colleague here from Russia. Russian disinformation began in the Ukraine. The meta-narrative that was seeded in 2014 to annex Crimea is the very same meta-narrative that is used to actually invade Ukraine itself in 2022. 2014 was also the year that my president, the only son and namesake of our dictator, who we ousted in a people power revolt in 1986, so 38 years ago, 2014 was the year that information operations began to literally change history in front of our eyes. The kleptocrat who stole $10 billion in 1986 became the greatest leader the Philippines has ever known. And since then, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. won overwhelmingly in our May 2022 elections. I'll just end with this thing of when democracy becomes hardest, and it is extremely hard right now. This is my 38th year as a journalist. I've never seen, look at Ukraine, Gaza, right? The open wars we're dealing with, but then also look at all the invisible wars that are tearing us apart. I teach, right, at Columbia University, systems of education, Back to the Future. In the panel yesterday, we talked about nostalgia for authoritarian rule, nostalgia for a strongman leader. I've lived with this my entire career as a journalist, because after 1986, after 1998 in Indonesia, the fall of Suharto, after nearly 32 years in power, change came so quickly. We had a new president every year, right? The chaos of a democracy makes people want to duck their heads, pull their heads down, ignore the world, and just wish for someone to take care of it. And the world is pushing back, right? So we already have Marcos in the Philippines. Prabowo, the son-in-law of former President Suharto, won the presidency in February this year in Indonesia. Malaysia has had former Prime Minister Mahathir back, and the finance minister he kicked out in 1997 is now Prime Minister of Malaysia. You have Bolsonaro doing a resurgence in Brazil,
and you have Trump doing a resurgence in the US.
That one.
And you have Zuma doing a resurgence act in South Africa.
Hello, what are we doing?
Yeah, so to that point, I mean, you talked about democracy falling off a cliff a year after winning the Nobel Prize. How close to the precipice are we, and what should journalism and journalists' response be to that?
How close? We're right there. Like, if I go to the edge, like literally, and the fall is beginning. Who are the first people who have the power to stop it? Big tech, then journalists, or maybe journalists and then big tech. Because if we push our governments, the third are governments, democratic governments, right? Maybe it is us first doing the stories that will tell people exactly how they're being manipulated by the technology that connects us. But that will take time. We're right there. And so I've continued to appeal to the 5 major companies that have made a lot of money. We talked about surveillance in this one. What about surveillance capitalism, right? The business model of taking all of our data. If they had a little less greed, if they moderate the greed just a little bit, we might be able to save democracy. But so far, the journalists, we're doing our jobs, but we need to do more. So, you know.
What more? How?
Well, let me first talk before we go to us, because you know what? We journalists, we're very good at hitting ourselves.
Self-flagellation, we are expert at, yes.
Also because we thought we had the power, like a vestigial tail. I've been in rooms with news heads who still carry the vestigial tail, right? But the distribution of the journalism is not in our hands as much as it used to be a decade ago. But look, when I wrote How to Stand Up to a Dictator, I was talking about 2 in that one in the Philippines. The first was Rodrigo Duterte. He is no longer in power, and he is now, well, Ferdinand Marcos is there. So I'll say we went from hell when so many people were killed in a brutal drug war. We're now in purgatory. So it is possible to improve, right? But the second dictator I was talking about is Mark Zuckerberg, and I would say that was far more global in scope. He has far more power than one country, and I always felt like I could never fight the battle unless we took up big tech. And this leads to that third group, governments. Where are you, right? Like the Better Business Bureau, why are you not protecting citizens from insidious manipulation? The EU has stepped in, but as it rolled out the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act, large language models was rolled out. Leapfrogged over, and now all of us have to again look at existing laws like, oh yeah, copyright. Well, maybe it's not a copyright violation if I take all your content and feed it to my machine. And then sell it back to you, right? So I think in the first contact with AI, which is social media, that's machine learning that evolved to AI, that became algorithms that literally tore us apart in many different ways, right? Ghettoizing us, selling us to the second contact with generative AI, which is even worse. I had, this is a few months ago already, but I'm not a politician, but I was selling crypto when I didn't do it, right? They took video, it looked very real, sounded very real.
So this is a disinformation narrative that's got the benefits of generative AI with its very sophisticated, cheap, easy production behind it, with you as...
Well, this one was interesting, right? Because we're still investigating this and we're going back to big tech to give us more data on it, but you know, you actually need to go get a subpoena if you want that data. So this one, I was selling crypto, but it used the attacks against me, and we traced the networks to the top advertising network in Russia. I mean, where does money and power intertwine, right? Yeah. So we published it, I'll tweet it, exit, whatever, and you can see, but I think if this is happening to us, it is happening to you, and it is going to get worse.
So what you're reflecting on there, like back to the future theme, is a kind of supercharging of all of the threats that societies were facing in that era with the rise of fascism. And at that time, I mean, in this city, in this country, Italian fascism was on the rise. Here we are again talking about the prospects of
But
declining
Meloni
democracy.
isn't as bad as you all thought, right? Sorry.
But now, the distinction is, then there was propaganda, then there was disinformation, then there was hate speech, then there was genocide. We are in a very similar situation, but what you're describing is the function of authoritarian tech as both a facilitator and a supercharger of these threats.
Enabler.
An enabler,
Right.
indeed.
Yeah, absolutely. It is in the toolkit of authoritarians and dictators to be. I would say it's done two things, and it's going to get worse, and I hope we can come together to try to fight this together, because individually, as individual news organizations, we're not going to survive this. That is, this whole, the polarization is because of the friends of friends algorithm. That was used in every single social media platform. They A/B tested it, and it works. They grew, and you're talking hundreds of billions of dollars a year in surveillance capitalism, right? So, so there is the polarization. There is the dismantling of facts. This idea, the tech idea of personalization, right? At the beginning, we laughed at it because it was just, if you looked at sneakers on the web, then you would be followed by sneakers through every single thing that you do. But think of that as geopolitical power, right? So personalization, you do one thing and you're fed that. It's far more sophisticated today. We can now be fed our individual realities.
And we see this with misogyny in particular, back to that earlier point you made.
It allows, it
referred to more and more,
it encourages
extreme content.
Horrific behavior, right? And actually encourages the worst of human nature. But again, think about it. If each of us in this church-like hall is in their own reality, how do we come together and solve any problem? It's like the Matrix meets the Truman Show, right? We're powering the engine and we're performing in our own shows, but they're not connecting. How do we solve climate change? How do we have democracy? And again, I feel like Sisyphus and Cassandra combined, because in the Nobel lecture, I said, this is an atom bomb exploding in our information ecosystem. And unlike World War II, when it horrified everyone so that we created the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we stopped the worst of humanity, this one is more insidious.
Well, we built systems in response to it. UN systems, Universal Declarations of Human Rights. And we have NATO, and we have a situation where things like the Ruggie Principles, which the UN published as a way of trying to compel or at least encourage strongly businesses to put human rights at the core of their activities. And we are in a situation where, as you've already described, abject failure of self-regulation and a rejection of ethics and human rights has led us into this situation.
You guys have read Mark Andreessen's manifesto that was published around May last year, right?
Big tech investor who believes
lots of money in tech, and he said ethics is evil. Trust and safety is evil, right? And again, think about, like, from social media, what spreads the fastest? What are we encouraging everyone on social media to do? Lie, because lies spread 6 times faster than really boring facts. That's an MIT study. I'll tweet it.
We need to stop Xing it.
I know.
think
well,
eventually.
can you get off?
We need a system to allow us to have a discussion about accountability of big tech and the implications for democracy and journalism without having to rely on these outlets, right?
Well, so
platforms.
it's been 8 years for Rappler, and last year we decided that we would build our own safe distribution model, and we would pledge to keep our community safe. We rolled it out quietly in Christmas. It's a Matrix protocol chat app. Please look for it, download it. Here's the problem. So I was sitting with our CTO. For every single feature, my CTO would say, personalize this, Maria, you'll get more take-up, people will stay longer. And every time I made a call to keep the community together, i.e. not personalize it, It meant that I was taking a risk that you'd be bored and jump out. So it's a thinking fast versus thinking slow path, right? If we build deliberative technology, and there have been attempts. Polis was rolled out in 2014, right? Taiwan tried Polis. But everything that tries to protect the public sphere means it's not manipulating you, which means you get bored quicker.
Can I just pick up on that, and then I need to go to the floor to allow people to ask questions in quick succession because we're rapidly running out of time. You referred to, I think, Mark Zuckerberg as a dictator, right? To be fair, he's not alone in the big tech world.
Yeah.
And then just to pick up on that point, the CEO of Google was recently paraphrased in a Wired article talking about the need to contain disinformation and hate speech, for example, through generative AI. And something really struck me and stuck with me that he was paraphrased as saying, which is, yes, we want truth, you know, to be protected in these spaces. But the problem is when you tune it too hard for truth and facts, it gets very, very boring very, very quickly. So I just wanted to put that there into the discussion. But can we have a show of hands? I'm going to take 3 questions from the floor. They need to be very quickly delivered, and then I'll ask Maria to address those.
While you're getting the mic, let me just address this one, what you just said, right? Like, both instances when AI was rolled out to humanity, neither instance was anchored in facts. Why? Because they're not accountable for facts. We are. The journalists are, right? So the very first instance, the algorithms prioritize the spread of lies. At large language models, you could build, like Google did, a knowledge graph. You could use GraphRag to actually anchor it so it doesn't hallucinate. But they didn't because they make more money this way. Look, yeah, okay, ask.
No, well, you keep talking, but please, if you want to ask a question, put your hand up so that the microphone can find you.
Can come to you.
Yeah.
So I'll say one last thing. You know, I have very good friends in all these tech companies because we work with all the tech companies. Rappler is an OpenAI partner. Yes, we are frenemies on all of it, but we need to call it out. We need the tech, but we need safety.
Hi, I'm Luke Johnson. I run the Public Sphere newsletter, and I'm a Berlin-based journalist. Where do you see the platforms going? Mark Zuckerberg has decided to de-emphasize political content ahead of this pivotal year, and it seems that Twitter is completely unmoderated, albeit far less culturally relevant than it was 2 or 3 years ago. I'm curious where you see these platforms going now as opposed to 2016, 2017, 2018. Thank you.
And is there another question we can take in tandem, if anyone else would like to ask a question? No? Let's go with that one.
Thank you for your question. I would say that Meta has decided to kill traffic to news organizations. You would have seen this. It began in January last year when traffic dropped anywhere from 50% to 95%, depending on where you are in the world, right? And we heard this yesterday from a former Meta employee. Meta is out of the house. Facebook was the world's largest distributor of news, right? They also announced that they would be killing CrowdTangle. There's a nice, it's funny, all the euphemisms tech uses. What's the word? They would be deprecating CrowdTangle, killing CrowdTangle in August, right before the US presidential elections, right? Right before. So first, please let us all gather together and demand CrowdTangle stays, right? Where is it headed? Unless governments step up, because governments have also abdicated responsibility for this, we will continue to go the direction we've had. And you know, it was very interesting. If you think ahead to 2040, it's an exercise we just went through with the Open Society early this week. What does 2040 look like? Wow, it looks like we're living in a Black Mirror episode. And not so sure news will survive. In fact, I would say this year and next year will be critical for digital news. We must come together because there are only 3 ways traffic comes to a website: direct, social, and search. Social has already been choked, right? We've felt this. Search. large language models have come in and Google says that, you know, hey, you can choose to opt out. OpenAI says you can choose to opt out from your publication. But what they neglected to tell us is the SGE, the Search Generative Experience, it's been rolled out in 125 countries, and it is built on search. So if you opt out of that, you disappear from the internet, right? So again, lots of friends in all these companies, and I know some of them are trying to do their best, but you need to try harder.
It's not good enough, is it? And as you say, the regulatory response is not quick enough and
because
not
if you're not
enough.
willing to do our jobs as journalists, then you need to do more to protect the journalists who are trying to protect democracy.
Just one, we have another question, and I think we're out of time, but can we go a couple of minutes longer? I'm just going to say yes, we can. Please raise your hand and take the microphone. And I just want to add, while the microphone is coming, something that I learned while I was in Kenya, a place which knows a thing or two about the manipulation of social platforms and the abrogation of the companies. I learned from a civil society researcher something that you were alluding to, which is that Instagram, for example, has rolled out rather quietly a mode which effectively means that unless you opt in to follow political sources, they will not be delivered to your feed. So and I don't mean politicians and political parties.
News.
I mean content about politics ahead of the US elections. Sorry, go.
Hello, my name is Sandra from Finland, from
Hi,
Yle.
Sandra. Oh, Finland.
Yes. Thank you. It's been really, really interesting to hear you speak, and thank you for everything you've done for journalism and democracy. I'm wondering, how do you keep the despair at bay? Where do you find the strength not to give up?
Excellent. And I was going to ask for some hope, so please deliver it via this question.
It's raining and cold outside. You, look at this room, right? We're here. We're fighting the good fight at a time that matters. And, you know, for all of the women politicians are also under attack, but it's not about taking sides, right? It was never about that. It's about protecting the public sphere. It is about holding power to account. Where do I find hope? We're here. We're still here. Oh, I mean, look, I'm not in jail. That's a pretty good thing, right?
And that, friends, is how you stand up to a dictator. But I think it would be remiss if I didn't point out, for anybody who is unaware, and too many people are unaware, Maria still faces considerable time in jail. She is still, believe it or not, convicted of a crime for cyber libel in the Philippines, which means that every single time she travels, including this time, she has to go to court or courts and pay bonds so that she can get on the plane. She has paid more in bonds to travel than Imelda Marcos ever had to pay. So here we are celebrating an extraordinary human who continues to fight for democracy, just going to sit there and take it. All she wants to do is refer to other people's exceptionalism. But
No. Okay, enough about me, right? But look, I see in the front row, Jason Rezaian, 544 days in an Iranian jail, and he is here. That's hope, right, guys?
Exactly. And sitting next to Jason is Keelan Gallagher, who is one of Maria's senior legal team members. And I think it's really important also to highlight the human rights defender ecosystem. Journalists are part of that. Barristers like Keelan and her team are part of that. Colleagues like Jason and many others in the room who have also suffered the extreme threats that we're fighting to protect are part of that. And this solidarity, as Maria says, I think underscores hope. Final word to you.
More journalists have been killed today, have been silenced, but in the Philippines, more lawyers have been killed than journalists. This is not just a journalist problem, right? It is possible to insidiously manipulate democracy at the cellular level, i.e. person to person. The fact that you are here, the fact that you are working, right? This is it. This is the moment. And I still have faith. I think we can do this. Let's not fall off the cliff. Thank you
Thank
for
you,
all the
everyone.
work you do.